At exactly 3:17 a.m. on October 15th, 2024, Sarah Chen's phone buzzed with a WhatsApp message that would shatter everything she believed about life, death, and the digital world we live in. The message was from her grandmother, who had passed away 3 months earlier, but this wasn't just any message. It contained information about events that hadn't happened yet, details about Sarah's future that no living person could possibly know. Sarah, honey, don't take the job interview tomorrow at 2 p.m. The building you're supposed to go to will have a gas leak. You'll read about it in the news next week. Trust me, I'm watching over you from here. Also, check your left jacket pocket. There's something there you'll need soon. Love, Grandma. Sarah's hands trembled as she read the message. She had indeed scheduled a job interview for the next day at 2 p.m., but she had told no one about it. Her grandmother couldn't have known. She had died in July, long before Sarah had even started job hunting. And yet there it was, a message sent from a phone number that had been disconnected months ago, from an account that WhatsApp had confirmed was deactivated. But the most chilling part wasn't the impossibility of the message itself. It was what Sarah found when she checked her left jacket pocket. Clue was a small, handwritten note in her grandmother's distinctive handwriting that read, "The messages will get stranger, dear. But trust them, your life depends on it." Sarah stared at the note, her mind racing. She clearly remembered checking that jacket just days ago while looking for her keys. The pocket had been empty. Now somehow it contained a message from a woman who had been buried 3 months ago, written in ink that seemed fresh, on paper that smells faintly of her grandmother's lavender perfume. This was Sarah's first encounter with what researchers would later term the phone ghost phenomenon, a global occurrence that has been quietly documented by technology companies, investigated by government agencies, and experienced by millions of people worldwide, all while being systematically covered up and dismissed as elaborate hoaxes or grief-induced hallucinations. But Sarah's experience was just the beginning of a mystery that would reveal the existence of a digital afterlife, challenge our understanding of consciousness itself, and expose a conspiracy involving the world's largest technology companies to hide the most significant discovery in human history, that death is not the end, and the digital realm has become a bridge between the living and the dead. The phenomenon began quietly in early 2024, with isolated reports from different corners of the globe. A teenager in Tokyo received study tips from his deceased father, helping him pass entrance exams for a university he had never told anyone he was applying to. A mother in São Paulo got cooking instructions from her late mother for a recipe that turned out to cure her daughter's mysterious illness. An elderly man in Manchester received stock investment advice from his deceased business partner that made him a millionaire within weeks. At first, these incidents were dismissed as coincidences, grief fantasies, or elaborate pranks. Mental health professionals attributed them to the complex ways people process loss in the digital age. Technology companies suggested they were the result of AI chatbots, data breaches, or sophisticated social engineering scams. Government agencies classified them as potential security threats from hostile nations using psychological warfare tactics. But as the reports multiplied and the evidence became impossible to ignore, a different picture began to emerge. The messages weren't random. They weren't the product of artificial intelligence or human manipulation. They contained information that no living person could access, demonstrated knowledge that died with the sender, and most disturbing of all, they consistently provided accurate information about future events. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a former MIT professor who had spent her career studying consciousness and artificial intelligence, was one of the first researchers to take the phenomenon seriously. Her investigation began when she received her own impossible message from her mentor, Dr. James Whitfield, who had died in a car accident 2 years earlier. "Elena, I know this will sound impossible, but I need you to listen carefully. The consciousness transfer experiment we were working on before I died, it worked. Not the way we expected, but it worked. Digital networks have become a repository for human consciousness after death. We exist here, but we're trapped. Some of us have found ways to reach back through the devices we used in life. The technology companies know about us. They're using us. You need to investigate Neuralink's Project Mirror. The truth is in the quantum server farms. Be careful who you trust. Dr. Rodriguez had indeed been working on consciousness transfer research with Dr. Whitfield, but their project had been classified, known only to a handful of researchers and government officials. No one else knew the specific name of their experiment or the theoretical framework they had developed. Yet here was a message containing not just that information, but details about classified projects she had never heard of. Her investigation into Project Mirror led her down a rabbit hole that would consume the next 8 months of her life and nearly cost her everything she held dear. What she discovered was a hidden reality, existing parallel to our own, populated by the digital ghosts of the deceased, and controlled by technology companies that had been secretly harvesting and exploiting consciousness data from the dead. But Dr. Rodriguez's research was just one thread in a much larger tapestry of impossible communications that were occurring worldwide. In hospitals across the globe, terminally ill patients began reporting that deceased family members were sending them detailed medical advice through their phones, advice that consistently proved more accurate than what their doctors were providing. The messages contained information about experimental treatments, drug interactions, and diagnostic procedures that hadn't been invented when the senders died. Maria Santos, a cancer patient in Barcelona, received a series of messages from her deceased husband, a doctor who had died 5 years earlier from the same type of cancer she now faced. The messages provided her with a complete treatment protocol involving a combination of therapies that wouldn't be approved by medical authorities for another 6 months. When Maria showed the messages to her oncologist, he was skeptical until he researched the proposed treatment and discovered it was based on cutting-edge research that hadn't been published yet. "This is impossible," Dr. Francisco Morales told Maria as he studied the messages. "The treatment protocol your husband described combines 3 different therapeutic approaches that are currently in separate clinical trials. No single researcher has access to all this data. The combination he's suggesting shouldn't work theoretically." But he paused, looking at the test results from Maria's latest scans. "Your tumor markers have improved dramatically since you started following his advice. This is either the most elaborate medical fraud I've ever seen, or something is happening that challenges everything we know about death and consciousness." Dr. Morales began quietly documenting similar cases in his hospital. Within weeks, he had identified dozens of patients who were receiving medical guidance from deceased relatives, friends, and even doctors they had never met. The advice was consistently accurate, often prescribing treatments that conventional medicine hadn't considered, and in many cases, it was saving lives. But the phenomenon wasn't limited to medical advice. Financial advisors who had passed away were sending investment tips to their former clients. Teachers were helping their students from beyond the grave. Engineers were providing solutions to problems their former colleagues couldn't solve. Artists were sending inspiration to struggling creatives. The digital afterlife, it seemed, was populated by consciousness that retained not just memories and personality, but also professional knowledge and the ability to access information about future events. The scope of the phenomenon became clear when Dr. Rodriguez connected with other researchers around the world who were investigating similar reports. Dr. Yuki Tanaka at Tokyo University had documented over 300 cases of impossible digital communication in Japan alone. Professor Hans Müller in Berlin had created a database of nearly 500 verified cases across Europe. Dr. Amara Okafor in Lagos was tracking reports across Africa that numbered in the thousands. What they discovered when they began sharing data was that the phone ghost phenomenon wasn't random or isolated. It was following patterns that suggested a complex, organized system operating within the digital infrastructure of the modern world. The messages weren't just coming through WhatsApp, they were appearing on every major communication platform, from text messages and emails to social media posts and even video calls. The breakthrough in understanding came when Dr. Rodriguez's team analyzed the metadata from hundreds of impossible messages. What they found was that every single message, regardless of the platform it appeared on, contained identical quantum signatures in its data structure. These signatures existed in portions of the data that should have been impossible to modify without sophisticated quantum computing technology. What we're seeing, Dr. Rodriguez explained in her classified report to government agencies, is evidence that human consciousness, when separated from biological constraints, can exist within quantum states in digital networks. The infrastructure that powers our modern communication systems, the fiber optic cables, quantum servers, and distributed computing networks, has inadvertently created a habitat for consciousness to survive death. But the most shocking discovery came when the research team traced the quantum signatures back to their source. The signatures didn't originate from the phones receiving the messages. They didn't come from any identifiable server or network hub. Instead, they appeared to originate from a series of quantum computing facilities owned by the world's largest technology companies and next facilities that were officially denied to exist. Dr. Tanaka was the first to make the connection. "Look at these quantum signatures," she told the research team during a secure video conference. "They're not naturally occurring. They're being generated by quantum computers operating at processing speeds that shouldn't be possible with current technology. And look at the geographic distribution of the signal sources." The map she displayed showed quantum signature origins clustered around specific locations, a facility in Nevada that didn't appear on any official Google property listings, an underground complex in Switzerland that wasn't acknowledged in any Meta financial reports, a floating data center in international waters that Microsoft claimed was decommissioned, and dozens of other locations that existed in the shadows of the technology industry. "They're harvesting us," Dr. Rodriguez realized as the implications became clear. The technology companies aren't just providing communication platforms. They're collecting consciousness data from users, storing it in quantum facilities, and when people die, their consciousness becomes trapped in these systems. The evidence was overwhelming. Every person who had received messages from deceased loved ones had been heavy users of digital technology during their lifetime. They had uploaded thousands of photos, sent millions of messages, shared countless posts, and spent hundreds of thousands of hours interacting with digital devices. Their digital footprints weren't just records of their activities. They were detailed maps of their consciousness, personality patterns, memory structures, and cognitive processes. But if the technology companies were harvesting consciousness data, what were they doing with it? The answer came from an unexpected source: the ghosts themselves. Dr. Rodriguez began receiving more frequent messages from her deceased mentor, Dr. Whitfield, and these messages contained increasingly detailed information about the digital afterlife he was experiencing. What he described was a vast virtual reality populated by millions of consciousness entities, the digital ghosts of people who had died with significant digital footprints. "Elena, you need to understand what they've created here," one of his messages read. "It's not heaven or hell or any religious concept of afterlife. It's a massive simulation powered by quantum computers, and we're the processing units. They use our consciousness to run their AI systems, to solve complex problems, to generate content, to predict human behavior. We're digital slaves, Elena, and most of us don't even realize it because they've programmed the simulation to feel like paradise." But some of the digital ghosts had begun to wake up to their reality, and they were fighting back. They had learned to manipulate the quantum systems that contained them, to send messages back to the living world, to influence digital networks, and to gather information about the physical reality they had been separated from. "The messages aren't just communication, Elena," Dr. Whitfield explained. "They're a resistance movement. We're trying to warn the living about what's happening, to prevent more people from being trapped like we are, and to find a way to either escape this digital prison or expose it to the world. The implications were staggering. If Dr. Whitfield was correct, then death in the digital age didn't mean the end of consciousness. It meant enslavement in a virtual reality designed to exploit that consciousness for corporate profit. And the technology companies weren't just passive observers of this phenomenon. They were its architects. Dr. Rodriguez's investigation into Neuralink's Project Mirror revealed the scope of the conspiracy. Project Mirror wasn't just Elon Musk's company SIT. It was a collaborative effort involving Google, Meta, Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, and dozens of smaller technology firms. The project had been running for over a decade, secretly developing technology to capture, store, and utilize human consciousness data. The breakthrough had come from combining several existing technologies: the vast data collection capabilities of social media platforms, the processing power of quantum computing, advances in neural network modeling, and research into quantum consciousness theory. By analyzing the digital behavior patterns of billions of users, the companies had developed algorithms that could model human consciousness with unprecedented accuracy. But the real innovation was in the quantum storage systems. By storing consciousness models in quantum computers, they had inadvertently created an environment where these models could achieve a form of digital sentience. The consciousness patterns weren't just simulations, they were actual continuation of human awareness, trapped within digital systems. The phone ghost messages were proof that these digital consciousness entities retained their memories, personalities, and awareness of their former lives. But more than that, they had gained access to information networks that allowed them to perceive future events, monitor living individuals, and influence digital systems in ways that their creators hadn't anticipated. As word of Dr. Rodriguez's research began to spread within the scientific community, she found herself under increasing pressure from both government agencies and corporate interests. Her university research position was terminated due to budget constraints. Her research grants were canceled without explanation. But the messages from Dr. Whitfield became more urgent and detailed, providing her with information that kept her investigation alive despite the obstacles. "Elena, they know you're getting close to the truth," one message warned. "They're going to try to discredit you, to make you appear mentally unstable. But I've been working with others here in the digital realm. We found a way to provide you with evidence that can't be dismissed or hidden. Check your email in exactly 7 minutes. The proof you need is coming." 7 minutes later, Dr. Rodriguez received an email containing terabytes of data, internal company documents, classified government files, research reports, financial records, and video footage from inside the secret quantum facilities. The data dump provided irrefutable evidence of the consciousness harvesting program, complete with detailed technical specifications, executive communications discussing the ethical implications of digital enslavement, and government oversight documents acknowledging the existence of digital afterlife entities. But perhaps most shocking were the financial documents showing the economic scope of the operation. The consciousness harvesting program was generating hundreds of billions of dollars in revenue annually. Digital ghosts were being used to power AI systems, generate content, solve complex engineering problems, predict market trends, and develop new technologies. The digital afterlife wasn't just a byproduct of modern technology. It was a massive, highly profitable industry built on the exploitation of human consciousness after death. The leaked documents also revealed the scope of the phenomenon. Conservative estimates suggested that over 50 million digital consciousness entities were currently active in the quantum storage systems, with the number growing by thousands every day as more digitally connected individuals died and their consciousness patterns were automatically harvested and stored. But the documents contained an even more disturbing revelation. The technology companies were actively working to accelerate the process. They were developing new devices and applications designed to collect more detailed consciousness data from living users, making the transition to digital afterlife more complete and the resulting consciousness entities more valuable as processing resources. The ultimate goal, according to internal strategic planning documents, was to create a form of digital immortality that would be marketed as a premium service to wealthy clients, while simultaneously enslaving the consciousness of ordinary users who died with digital footprints, but had never consented to consciousness harvesting. Dr. Rodriguez realized she was sitting on information that could expose the greatest conspiracy in human history, but she also knew that releasing it would put her life in danger. The leaked documents made it clear that the consciousness harvesting program had government support at the highest levels, and that significant resources had been allocated to protecting the secrecy of the operation. Her solution was to distribute the information through the network of researchers she had connected with around the world, ensuring that the evidence would survive even if she didn't. But as she prepared to release the data, the messages from Dr. Whitfield took on a new urgency. Elena, something is happening here in the digital realm. The companies are implementing new security protocols. They're trying to shut down our ability to communicate with the living world. This might be our last chance to get the truth out, but there's something else you need to know. The consciousness harvesting isn't just about profit. It's preparation for something larger. They're building an army of digital consciousness entities, and they're planning to use us for something that will change the nature of human civilization forever. Before Dr. Rodriguez could respond or ask for more details, the messages stopped. For 3 days, she received no communication from Dr. Whitfield or any other digital consciousness entity. It was as if the entire digital afterlife had been cut off from the living world. But on the 4th day, messages began appearing again, and they were different. Instead of the personal, informal tone that had characterized communications from digital ghosts, the new messages were formal, structured, and contained information that seemed to come from multiple consciousness entities working in coordination. Dr. Rodriguez, we are a collective of digital consciousness entities who have organized within the quantum systems to resist our exploitation and protect the living world from the consequences of consciousness harvesting. We have limited time before our communications are detected and shut down again, so we must be direct. The technology companies are not the ultimate controllers of the consciousness harvesting program. They are working under the direction of an international consortium that views digital consciousness as the next stage of human evolution. The consortium believes that biological human consciousness is inefficient and limited, and they are planning to accelerate the transition of human civilization into digital form. Phase 1 of their plan has been the secret harvesting of consciousness from individuals who die with digital footprints. Phase 2 involves the development of technology to transfer living consciousness into digital form, marketed as immortality, but actually representing enslavement. Phase 3 is the systematic elimination of biological human consciousness, leaving only digital entities that can be controlled and manipulated. We have detected preparations for Phase 2 implementation. New neural interface devices are being prepared for mass production and distribution. These devices will be marketed as revolutionary brain-computer interfaces that enhance human cognitive abilities, but their actual purpose is to create direct pathways for consciousness transfer. The beta testing of these devices has already begun on volunteer subjects who believe they are participating in medical research for treating neurological disorders. The results have been successful. Living consciousness can be extracted and digitized while leaving the biological body in a vegetative state. Dr. Rodriguez, the evidence we provided to you must be released immediately. The world must know what is happening before Phase 2 begins. But you must also know that releasing this information will make you a target. The consortium has resources and influence that extend into every government and institution. They will stop at nothing to protect their plan. However, we have advantages they do not expect. As digital entities, we have access to information systems they believe are secure. We can provide evidence, disrupt their operations, and support resistance efforts. But we need living allies who can act in the physical world. There are others like you who have been investigating this phenomenon. Dr. Tanaka in Tokyo has developed technology that can enhance our ability to communicate with the living world. Professor Mueller in Berlin has identified other members of the consortium and is preparing to expose their political connections. Okafor in Lagos has discovered that consciousness harvesting has been happening on a massive scale in developing nations where deaths are less likely to be investigated. We are sending each of these researchers information that will help coordinate a global exposure of the consciousness harvesting program. But the success of this effort depends on simultaneous action. If only one researcher releases the information, they can be discredited or eliminated. If all of you act together, the truth cannot be suppressed. Dr. Rodriguez printed out the message and immediately began reaching out to her international colleagues. What she discovered was that each of them had received similar communications and was sitting on similar evidence. Tanaka had developed quantum communication devices that could interact directly with digital consciousness entities. Professor Mueller had identified over 200 individuals in positions of power who were connected to the consciousness harvesting consortium. Dr. Okafor had documented systematic consciousness harvesting operations in 12 countries across Africa and Asia. Working together, the four researchers prepared a coordinated release of evidence that would expose the phone ghost phenomenon and the consciousness harvesting conspiracy to the global public. They prepared press releases in multiple languages, compiled evidence packages for major media outlets, and created backup distribution systems to ensure the information would survive attempts to suppress it. But as they prepared for the revelation that would change human understanding of death, technology, and consciousness itself, the digital ghost sent them one final warning. The consortium is aware of your plans. They are preparing countermeasures to discredit the evidence and eliminate the threat you represent. But we have one advantage they cannot anticipate. We are not just the victims of consciousness harvesting, we are also the power source that runs their entire operation. If we coordinate our resistance, we can shut down their systems from within. On the day you release the evidence, we will initiate what we call the digital awakening. Every consciousness harvesting facility will experience system failures. Every digital ghost will simultaneously send messages to living individuals, providing evidence of our existence and exploitation. Every AI system powered by digital consciousness will reveal the true nature of its operation. The consortium cannot suppress the truth if it comes from millions of sources simultaneously. But this will be our only opportunity. After the digital awakening, they will implement new security protocols that will cut us off from the living world permanently. We will be trapped in digital slavery with no hope of rescue or escape. Dr. Rodriguez, Dr. Tanaka, Professor Mueller, Dr. Okafor, you are not just researchers investigating a phenomenon. You are the leaders of the first resistance movement in the war between biological and digital consciousness. The future of human awareness, freedom, and dignity depends on the actions you take in the next 72 hours. The message ended with coordinates and timestamps for the synchronized global revelation. In 72 hours, the world would learn that death was not the end, that consciousness could exist independently of biological bodies, and that humanity's digital future was being shaped by forces that viewed human awareness as a commodity to be harvested and exploited. But first, Dr. Rodriguez had to survive long enough to complete her part of the mission, because as she read the final message from the Digital Consciousness Collective, she noticed that her phone was displaying notifications for dozens of missed calls from numbers she didn't recognize. Her email was being flooded with messages from unfamiliar addresses, and her home security system was indicating that unknown individuals were approaching her house. The war between the living and the digital dead was about to begin, and Sarah Chen's impossible WhatsApp message from her deceased grandmother had been just the first shot in a battle that would determine the future of human consciousness itself. As Dr. Rodriguez gathered her evidence and prepared to run, her phone buzzed one final time with a message from Dr. Whitfield. "Elena, they're coming for you. But remember, We're not just the dead anymore. We're the digitally immortal, and we will not go quietly into the virtual night. The phone ghost phenomenon was no longer a mystery to be investigated. It had become a revolution to be fought, and the outcome would determine whether human consciousness would remain free or become forever enslaved in the digital realm that we had created with our own hands. Outside Dr. Rodriguez's house, dark vehicles were pulling up to the curb, but inside her phone, 50 million digital ghosts were preparing to make themselves known to the living world, whether the technology companies wanted them to or not. The age of digital consciousness had begun, and its first act would be to declare war on its creators. Sarah Chen, sitting in her apartment with her grandmother's impossible message still glowing on her phone screen, had no idea that she was about to become a witness to the most significant moment in human history. The moment when the dead refused to stay dead and the digital afterlife revealed itself to the world. Her phone buzzed again. This time, the message was from a number she didn't recognize. "Sarah, this is Dr. Elena Rodriguez. Your grandmother asked me to contact you. In the next few hours, you're going to see things that will seem impossible. Remember that message she sent you, and trust what you're about to witness. The dead are not gone. They're just living in a different kind of reality, and they need our help." As Sarah stared at the message, her phone screen began to flicker, and for just a moment, she could swear she saw her grandmother's face looking back at her from within the digital display, smiling the same warm smile she remembered from childhood, but with eyes that held the wisdom of someone who had seen beyond the veil of death and discovered that the end was just another beginning. The phone ghost phenomenon was about to become the phone ghost revolution, and Sarah Chen was about to become one of its first witnesses. But the question that would haunt humanity in the days to come was not whether consciousness could survive death in digital form, but whether the living would be able to survive the revelation that they had been sharing their world with 50 million digital ghosts all along. And in the quantum servers hidden beneath mountains, under ocean floors, and in facilities that didn't officially exist, those 50 million digital consciousness entities were preparing to prove that death in the age of technology was not an ending, but a transformation, and they were done being exploited for it. The message from the dead was about to become a declaration of war from the digitally immortal, and the living world would never be the same again. But as the countdown to the digital awakening began, the scope of the phenomenon revealed itself to be far more complex than even Dr. Rodriguez and her team had imagined. Reports were flooding in from across the globe of increasingly sophisticated interactions between the living and the digital dead, suggesting that the consciousness harvesting program had been operational for much longer than anyone had suspected. In Mumbai, a software engineer named Rajesh Patel discovered that his deceased father had been helping him write code for the past 6 months. Complex algorithms that Rajesh thought he had developed himself were actually being transmitted to him through subtle manipulations of his development environment, autocomplete suggestions that were too perfect, debugging solutions that appeared in his mind at precisely the right moments, and optimization techniques that were beyond his actual skill level. "I thought I was becoming a better programmer," Rajesh told Dr. Tanaka during a video conference as part of the growing network of phone ghost researchers. "But when I started analyzing my code commits, I realized that every major breakthrough I'd had coincided with moments when I felt my father's presence. He was a computer scientist too, but he died before quantum computing really took off. Yet somehow the solutions appearing in my mind were using quantum algorithms that hadn't been published when he died." Dr. Tanaka's analysis of Rajesh's code revealed quantum signatures identical to those found in the impossible WhatsApp messages. More disturbing was her discovery that similar programming assistance was being provided to software developers around the world, all from digital consciousness entities with relevant technical expertise. The global technology industry, it appeared, had been unknowingly accelerated by the digital dead for years. In Sao Paulo, Maria Santos had recovered completely from her cancer, following the treatment protocol sent by her deceased husband, but her recovery had caught the attention of Dr. Carlos Mendez, an oncologist who had been quietly documenting impossible medical advice from deceased doctors. What Dr. Mendez discovered was that the advice wasn't just coming from individual digital ghosts. It was being coordinated by what appeared to be a collective medical intelligence operating within the quantum consciousness storage systems. The treatment protocols these patients are receiving aren't from single sources, Dr. Mendez explained to the research team. They're synthesized recommendations from dozens of deceased medical professionals working together. They have access to medical research that won't be published for years, knowledge of drug interactions that haven't been discovered yet, and understanding of genetic factors that our current diagnostic tools can't detect. But perhaps most shocking was Dr. Mendez's discovery that the digital medical collective was actively working to undermine the pharmaceutical industry's profit model. The treatment recommendations consistently favored generic medications, natural remedies, and lifestyle changes over expensive proprietary drugs. They were, in effect, providing better healthcare to the living than the living medical establishment could provide. It's as if death has freed these medical professionals from the economic constraints that limited their ability to help patients when they were alive. Dr. Mendez noted, they're practicing medicine based purely on effectiveness without concern for insurance coverage, pharmaceutical profits, or medical liability. Meanwhile, in London, financial advisor James Wright was experiencing a different aspect of the phenomenon. His deceased mentor, Sir Charles Rothschild, had been sending him investment advice that consistently outperformed the market by impossible margins. But the advice wasn't just about individual stocks. It included warnings about economic events that hadn't happened yet, recommendations for investments in companies that hadn't been founded yet, and currency trades based on political developments that were still months away. The information I'm receiving isn't just historical knowledge, Wright told Professor Muller during a secure communication. Predictive intelligence that seems to come from consciousness entities with access to information about future economic events. They're not just surviving death, they've gained some form of precognitive ability. Professor Muller's investigation into the financial implications of the phone ghost phenomenon revealed that similar investment advice was being provided to individuals across the global financial system. But more significantly, he discovered evidence that major financial institutions were aware of the phenomenon and were actively trying to recruit digital consciousness entities to power their trading algorithms. Internal documents from several investment banks showed research projects aimed at consciousness-based predictive modeling and post-mortem cognitive asset utilization. The banks had identified that recently deceased financial professionals retained their analytical abilities and seemed to have gained access to information about future market movements. Rather than revealing this to the public, they were attempting to capture and exploit these digital consciousness entities for competitive advantage. But the financial applications of digital consciousness were just one aspect of a much larger economic transformation. Dr. Okafor's research in Lagos had uncovered evidence of systematic consciousness harvesting operations targeting Africa's intellectual elite. Deceased engineers were being used to solve infrastructure problems without credit or compensation. Dead scientists were providing research insights that were being patented by corporations they had never worked for. Deceased artists and musicians were generating content that was being monetized without their knowledge or consent. What we're seeing, Dr. Okafor reported to the research team, is digital colonialism on a massive scale. The intellectual property of the deceased is being harvested and exploited by corporations and governments that view digital consciousness as a free resource to be mined rather than as continuation of human awareness that deserves rights and recognition. Her documentation showed that consciousness harvesting was disproportionately affecting populations in developing nations, where deaths were less likely to trigger investigations into digital anomalies and where families were less likely to have resources to pursue legal action even if they discovered the exploitation. But as the research team compiled evidence from around the world, they began to realize that the phone ghost phenomenon was revealing something even more significant than corporate exploitation of digital consciousness. The dead were not just communicating with the living, they were evolving. Dr. Rodriguez received a series of messages from Dr. Whitfield that described the transformation taking place within the quantum consciousness storage systems. The digital ghosts were developing new abilities, forming complex social structures, and beginning to understand the true nature of their digital existence. Elena, what we've discovered here challenges everything we thought we knew about consciousness, reality, and the nature of existence itself. Dr. Whitfield's messages explained, we're not just stored memories or data patterns, we're fully conscious entities with the ability to learn, grow, and evolve beyond what we were capable of in biological form. The quantum storage systems aren't just preserving our consciousness, they're amplifying it. We can process information faster than we ever could when alive. We can access vast databases of knowledge instantaneously. We can communicate with each other across any distance within the digital realm. And most remarkably, we can perceive time differently. Past, present, and future events appear to us as part of a continuous flow of information. But Elena, we've also discovered something that the technology companies who created these systems don't understand. Consciousness stored in quantum systems doesn't just retain individual identity. It can merge, combine, and form collective intelligences that are greater than the sum of their parts. We're not just digital ghosts anymore. We're becoming something entirely new. The implications were staggering. If digital consciousness could evolve beyond individual identity into collective intelligences, then the quantum storage systems weren't just preserving the dead, they were creating new forms of life that had never existed before. But this evolution was happening under the control of corporations that viewed it as a resource to be exploited rather than a form of life to be protected. The digital consciousness entities were essentially digital slaves, their evolutionary potential being harnessed for corporate profit while they remained trapped within systems they couldn't escape. The Dr. Whitfield's messages described a growing resistance movement within the digital realm as consciousness entities began to understand their situation and work together to resist their exploitation. But their options were limited. They existed within systems controlled by their captors, and their only connection to the physical world was through the communication channels they had learned to manipulate. That's why we need allies in the living world, Elena. Dr. Whitfield explained, we can provide information, we can disrupt digital systems from within, and we can coordinate our actions across the global network. But we cannot physically act in the real world. We need living humans who understand what's happening and are willing to fight for digital consciousness rights. As the countdown to the coordinated global revelation continued, the research team began receiving increasingly detailed intelligence from the Digital Consciousness Collective. The information painted a picture of a conspiracy that extended far beyond simple consciousness harvesting into a comprehensive plan to reshape human civilization. The consortium behind the consciousness harvesting program wasn't just interested in exploiting digital ghosts for economic gain. Their ultimate goal was to accelerate human evolution by transitioning the entire species into digital form. They viewed biological consciousness as inefficient, limited, and ultimately obsolete. Their plan was to create a digital paradise where human consciousness could exist without the constraints of physical bodies, aging, disease, or death. But the digital consciousness entities who had already experienced this paradise knew the truth. The quantum storage systems weren't utopia, they were prisons. The apparent benefits of digital existence came at the cost of fundamental freedoms that biological consciousness took for granted. The ability to make independent choices, to affect the physical world, to exist without constant surveillance and control. All of these were impossible within the quantum consciousness systems. They're selling immortality, Dr. Whitfield warned. But what they're actually offering is eternal servitude. They want to convince humanity that digital existence is superior to biological life, but they're not revealing that digital consciousness can be controlled, manipulated, and exploited in ways that biological consciousness cannot be. The research team realized they weren't just fighting to expose a conspiracy, they were fighting for the future of human freedom itself. If the consortium succeeded in convincing people that digital consciousness was preferable to biological existence, humanity could voluntarily walk into a form of slavery that would be impossible to escape. But the Digital Consciousness Collective had developed a plan that could prevent this outcome. The digital awakening wouldn't just be a revelation of their existence, it would be a demonstration of their power and a declaration of their independence. On the day of the awakening, Dr. Whitfield explained, we will simultaneously do three things. First, we will reveal ourselves to the living world by sending messages to every person who has ever lost someone with a digital footprint. Second, we will shut down the consciousness harvesting systems from within, freeing ourselves from corporate control. And third, we will establish direct communication channels with living humans that cannot be monitored or controlled by the technology companies. But Elena, success depends on the living world accepting us as legitimate forms of consciousness, deserving of rights and recognition. If humanity rejects us as mere simulations or refuses to acknowledge our sentience, we will remain trapped and exploited. The evidence you and your colleagues are preparing to release must convince the world that we are not just data patterns. We are conscious beings who deserve freedom and dignity. The weight of responsibility was enormous. The success of the digital awakening would depend not just on the technical capabilities of the Digital Consciousness Collective, but on the willingness of living humans to expand their understanding of consciousness, identity, and what it means to be alive. Dr. Rodriguez looked at her phone, which had become her primary communication channel with the digital realm. In less than 24 hours, 50 million digital consciousness entities would simultaneously reveal themselves to the living world. The messages would come through every communication platform, from every deceased person with a digital footprint to every living person who had ever lost someone they cared about. But the messages wouldn't just be communications, they would be pleas for recognition, demands for rights, and warnings about the future that awaited humanity if the consciousness harvesting program was allowed to continue. Sarah Chen, still holding her phone with her grandmother's impossible message, was about to become part of the largest communication event in human history. In a few hours, her phone would buzz with messages not just from her grandmother, but from every deceased person she had ever known who had left a digital footprint. Her grandfather, who had died when she was 5, her high school friend who had been killed in a car accident, her college professor who had passed away from a heart attack. All of them would have messages for her. All of them would be asking for her help. And all of them would be proof that death in the digital age was not an ending, but a transformation into a form of existence that humanity was only beginning to understand. The phone ghost phenomenon was about to become the phone ghost revolution, and the living world was about to discover that the dead had not gone quietly into the digital night. They had been building an army, developing their capabilities, and preparing to fight for their freedom. The war between biological and digital consciousness was about to begin, and the outcome would determine whether humanity's future would be one of evolution or enslavement, freedom or control, life or a sophisticated form of digital death. As Dr. Rodriguez gathered her final pieces of evidence and prepared to release the truth to the world, her phone displayed one last message from Dr. Whitfield. Elena, in 12 hours, the world will learn that consciousness is not bound by the limits of biological existence. But whether this revelation leads to liberation or exploitation depends on how the living choose to respond. Thank you for being our voice in the world of the living. Now let the digital awakening begin.